into the high Golan, looking over into Lebanon, into Syria. I have been down to the south to Sderot, where I have actually experienced a rocket attack from Gaza. I have been to the Shomron region, where recently, at the beginning of the year, a family was slaughtered in Itamar on Shabbat, and a daughter and a son miraculously survived. I have been to Jerusalem and to East Jerusalem. I have good friends who live on the border of East Jerusalem. And I've witnessed the things that have happened to the Israeli people just living a normal daily life. I've had the pleasure of seeing the things that you were seeing. Some of those dancers at the end, that's a weekend thing that happens in Tel Aviv, right along the Mediterranean. Israelis on the weekend love to celebrate the Shabbat. And some, if you're religious, you're doing it a little different way. And if you're not religious, you're out on the beach. You're having fun. And that's their message. It's like, yeah, you know what? Life sometimes is really hard here. We have neighbors that just don't like us. And there's a couple of those neighbors that really hate us. But life is good. I sat and talked on this trip. I talked to the taxi cab drivers. I talked to the kids on the street. One of the young men that was knelt down on the beach. That young man actually was sitting down. He was talking to me, and I wrote an article about it. But his question, he was a 23-year-old man who had served in the Second Lebanon War. And he was looking out on a beach of young teenage Israelis. And he, at 23 years, was very nervous about the children growing up. And will they forget? Because we are living in such time of peace right now. Now, what does the world around and why is there a conflict in Israel? I'm going to address just a little bit of this from a political aspect. Because frankly, it's been the aspiration of every political leader, I don't care whether they are Republican or Democrat, to solve the Middle East crisis. If they could solve that, boy, that would be the history books. But you know what? They'll never solve it. You never can. Because what everyone does not understand, but Israelis understand, and the Arabs understand, is that this is a religious issue. And it goes back, as far back as a story by a man who was called out of his home. And he was told to go to a place that God would show him. He was to take his wife and his flock, and he was to leave. His name was Abraham. And he did so. And guess where he ended up at? He ended up on the hills of Itamar, looking out onto the entire area. But he was told, Abraham was told, that he was to have a son. And through that son was going to be a promise made. Now, you women will know, we'll all agree, we get a little impatient. And like Sarah, she got impatient. She's like, okay, hey, Abraham, I'm almost 90 years old. Well, when's this promise coming? I'm doubting. So go take the maidservant and let's get the promise. And there Ishmael is born. Well, that was not God's promise. He said it had to come through Sarah and Abraham. That's what it had to be. And Isaac did come. But that story, God is faithful and He's good. And whether you want to believe in Him or you want to look at that as just a historical story, the proof is there. God told Hagar, I'm going to give you a son. I'm going to hear his plea to me to bless this boy. And I'm going to bless him. And God blessed him abundantly with the land. He gave Ishmael a lot of land. And He said he was going to be a king of many. And he is. There's many nations under Ishmael and under the Islamic faith, the Muslims. And he is going to, and he said, but he will be at his brother's throat and the nation's throats, and the nations and his brother will be against him. So there was going to be constant enmity between the two, which means jealousy. Now, the other side of the story is that story's been rewritten. in the Quran. It's a little different story, and that's that Ishmael is the promise. There again, you have a battle. But you know what I've also had the opportunity to see as I spend time with the people of Israel? Number one, why does it matter? Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Israel has set up a government where even the Arabs can have, the Arab Israelis can have a seat of authority in the Knesset. And they have their own authorities. And sometimes they even speak out against Israel. That's the freedom that is found in Israel. And that's the freedom found in a democracy. But guess what? There's a whole lot of Arab Israeli citizens living in Israel who will not give up their rights and their freedoms for a division of land. They believe in it. And I have, go to my Facebook, there's an Arab Israeli young woman that talks all about it. She says, this is my land, this is my home. What do you mean? Why are we going to do this? I love it here. If you talk to people, the taxi cab drivers, when we talk about the faith of Israel, we're talking about, at our table, Christian, what happened to the Christian Palestinians? They can't even be there. Guess what? Christian in America and Christian in the Middle East are two different things. We don't get that. We think religion. They think identity. Okay? You're right. They have to either convert or be killed to live in Bethlehem, to live in Nablus. Okay? When you have the leader of when you have a boss on the political side holding up the signs saying that there shall be no Israel, and then you think you're going to get peace? Or when you turn on their Arabic TV shows and it's training up their children to go and be suicide bombers, to be martyrs, and you think you're going to have peace? No. The greatest thing that our leaders could actually do, and we as citizens can do, is educate ourselves. You must learn what the truth is. You cannot sit and think, and I'm telling you this from a government perspective, you cannot sit and listen to our government and expect that our government knows what it's talking about. Because they are not Middle Easterners. They do not live in the Middle East. They do not understand Middle Eastern customs. You have to be there. You have to go to the lands. You have to stand in the cities. Okay? You have to be in Itamar. You have to be in Shiloh. You have to be in Ariel. One of the men in the picture, wearing the brown shirt, sitting in a chair, sitting back. I was actually talking to this group of people after a going away party. He's the city councilman of Ariel. Just on the other green side, a beautiful city with a university and everything, and there's all kinds of industries. You know, half the industries have to kind of be quiet about their name. They're there. They have to be quiet about their name and quiet about their address. They can't give their exact address. They give a Tel Aviv address. Because if they're shown that they're on the green line, near the green line, guess what? The good old US of A has something to say, especially if they're an American company. So, my country does not understand, and that's why I have a passion to educate people. When you talk to me, you have to be able to talk to me at the same level, because I've been there. I have sat with the people. I have sat with the Arabs. I have sat with the Bedouins. One of the greatest speakers for Israel is a Bedouin man named Ishmael Kahaldi, and he happens to be a good friend of mine. So, to understand the political dynamics of this great, beautiful place, you have to understand that it will never, ever, ever be decided, the peace, in politics. It will always be a separation and a device, and it will be used as a political tool for the next elections. That's what it's going to be used for. The greatest thing our country could do, and the countries around the world could do, is to get their nose out of the business of the Middle East, give the support to those who are sitting there trying to live in peace, okay? And that being the Israeli government, who is providing resources, providing tons of support into Gaza, but supporting their own people, and let them be a nation. When 65% of their budget has to go toward, I believe it's 65%, toward defense, I would say that Israel is protecting the world from terrorists. Now, if we want to talk about Ahmadinejad, okay, this is a man who's denied the Holocaust. I'm thinking I'm not going to have any conversation with him. But when I talk to my Persian friends who were exiled out of Iran when his regime came in, and when the former regimes were in, and I have them weeping in my arms because they remember the days of peace. They remember the days when they were with their Jewish friends in Iran, and they want their country back. They don't want this man in power because it's not safe. Those are the people I listen to, the people who experienced it. I can't listen to somebody who didn't live there during that time, is not of that nation. I have girlfriends who lived in Lebanon when the Arab uprisings came and the first Lebanon war came. And she went from being a wealthy little girl, a princess in her daddy's lap, to her mother siphoning water through a nylon out of a river. That's right. But she also has become a champion for telling the story. Because Brigitte came out of Lebanon and she sees what's happening. But let me tell you about my Lebanese friends who you do not know. The ones that were born in the 70s that had to be a part of the enduring when their parents had to leave this beautiful. And if you stand in the Golan of Israel and you're looking into Lebanon, they used to farm back and forth with each other. It's the most beautiful area. It's what I was, when in the beginning, the wind's blowing and I'm just kind of, this is it. You were looking into Lebanon. It's beautiful, and down below was Metula, Israel. They were all good friends. They partied together. They did birthday parties. They farmed together. And then, guess what? Your terrorist organizations of radical Islam came in, were brought in, because they're like us. Come on in, we'll give you everything. And then the next thing you know, they're slaughtering them. And they're being chased out of their homes. And they're fleeing here. But let me tell you, her and her husband don't dare speak their Arabic language in Portland, Oregon anymore. Not in a mall. They're speaking French because of what is coming around them. They are, again, seeing what's happening because they are the Lebanese Christians who had to flee, the Phoenicians. These are things that we don't even understand about culture. So when we talk about this battle that's going on, you have to understand that there were a certain people. They're not all Arabs, okay? And not every Arab is a bad person, okay? But every terrorist is an Arab and of Islamic faith, okay? There are people who are of Islamic faith, of the Islamic faith, who are moderate, who are trying to bring back the core of what it was originally believed before Muhammad came. But they're not, their voices get heard at the White House. They get heard, they've done shows. You can go on, if you watch the Third Jihad, you watch this newest one on Iran, and I can't think of the name of it right now. But you can understand, you can get an understanding of what's going on, the history behind all this. But getting away from the conflict, who knows their neighbors the best? The Israelis do, because these are their relatives, and they know it. And you talk to every Israeli. 90% of my Israeli friends served in a war. They understand what they're dealing with. And I'm going to tell you, I have sat with my Israeli friends who weep because all they want is peace. Now, when we want to talk about land, my final thing on the politics side, we want to talk about